What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to review episode 3 of season 2 of House of the Dragon. And as is always the case, there will be spoilers. But this episode was directed by Geeta Patel and written by David Hancock. No relation to James Hancock. And thank goodness, because I think he wrote a pretty lackluster ending to this episode. An episode which I liked and I was thoroughly enjoying. But that final scene really, well, I think, I won't go so far as to say that it crippled the show, but it showed all the trappings or all the hallmarks of kind of generic, predictable TV filler. And I get the fact that when you're adapting a book, which is written in kind of big, broad, sweeping generalizations as opposed to specific scenes, you do have to invent certain scenes just to kind of keep all the characters busy. But the reason I disliked that final scene was for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, this show is struggling a little bit in the ratings, and obviously it's too late to make any major changes now, but this season does need to hurry up and kind of get to the good stuff. And for people who have read Fire and Blood, they are willing to be, or I am willing to be patient, knowing all the good stuff that's coming. But this show is not doing that all that well, or HBO would be boasting and bragging about all the incredible ratings, although they already did obviously provide the green light or the renewal for season 3. But the main reason I disliked that final scene is that I thought it neither portrayed Rhaenyra nor Alicent as the cunning, scheming, kind of diabolical characters that they are. And I recognize they're trying to portray them as, you know, the people with restraint who basically are trying to avoid bloodshed if possible so that the whole region or the whole kingdom doesn't go down in flames. But the idea of Rhaenyra getting on a boat and sailing to King's Landing and putting herself at risk and her entire cause at risk is just totally absurd. All it would take is one cupbearer to notice her, and then her entire cause would just go down in flames. Or Alicent could raise her voice and some member of the Kingsguard could come over and have a look and see what's happening. It made Rhaenyra seem like she's pursuing peace to the point of foolishness. And with Alicent, if Alicent is so preoccupied with preventing war and preventing bloodshed and preventing towns and cities from being burned, all she would have to do is cry out, and once again, the war is over. But I just felt like this was TV filler at its worst, and I totally understand if a lot of people out there are starting to say, like, when is this show going to start giving us all the murder and mayhem and fire and blood that is promised by the title of the book? Fire and Blood. It's not called like Peace and Prosperity. It's called Fire and Blood because the Dance of the Dragons is gnarly and awful. And the third reason I dislike that final scene, it reintroduced the teleportation problem that plagued the final seasons of Game of Thrones. Like, if you look at the map of Westeros, it's big. It takes time to travel from point A to point B unless you're flying on a dragon, which is what makes dragons so advantageous. But for this little meeting, this little clandestine mission, Rhaenyra got on a boat, which would take time, and yet boing, she just teleports right to King's Landing. And I just feel like when you start trying to take shortcuts with your storytelling for whatever goal the writer might have had, it just it's very frustrating and annoying for people who know and love this world and appreciate the verisimilitude of it, where, you know, travel has consequences, and if it takes you a week to get to one place, well, then other things are going to happen during the journey. So I hope this show won't start taking similar shortcuts. Unless you are on Dragonback, it takes time to travel by horse, it takes time to travel by boat. But I don't want to get too preoccupied with my frustration with that final scene. But for a show where I've basically liked all of it, all of season 1 and 90% of season 2, it was my first little case where I was like ringing the alarm bell, like, you know what, this show is not perfect. But the rest of this episode was pretty goddamn solid, so let's get into those details. So the episode got underway showing the escalating tensions between House Bracken and House Blackwood. And these two houses, they've been feuding for many, many years. No one can even remember why they started feuding. But as we see this new war, this battle over succession, this battle over who's going to sit the Iron Throne, has allowed them to kind of reopen old wounds, whereupon it cuts to the aftermath of the battle, and we just see hundreds of people lying all over the place, you know, dead and disemboweled and all that kind of stuff. And obviously I would have preferred to have seen some of that battle, but I get it. For the sake of the budget of a TV show, sometimes you just need to cut to the aftermath. But what it does, it kind of underlines some of the things that Rhaenys has been saying, how if the war goes on long enough, like, there will come a point where people can't even really remember what started the war in the first place, because people will develop new grievances, new rivalries. The bloodlust will start kicking in. or just an excuse to dust off some old feuds and say, you know what, you said such and such a long time ago, now you have to die, blah, blah, blah. But it just shows how even if Alicent and Rhaenyra really wanted to stop the war, at this point, it's blood must be spilt before people's tempers can kind of calm down, and so on and so forth. And I also thought it was interesting just showing how the Riverlands are going to have enormous strategic importance moving forward, because if you control the Riverlands, well, then you can kind of control the whole middle of the Seven Kingdoms, or you could prevent soldiers from the north from coming down to provide reinforcements, or you could keep people from the Vale from coming in and providing reinforcements. It's got great strategic value. And for people who don't know their history or need a little refresher, the fortress of Harrenhal, back during the time of Aegon the Conqueror, was reputed to be the strongest fortress or the strongest castle in all the Seven Kingdoms. But obviously they built it not really thinking about dragons. When Aegon the Conqueror first started his invasion, he just flew way up high, up and over those walls, and he came down. And they said that his dragon, Balerion the Black Dread, breathed so much fire that even though stone can't burn, that the stone was glowing red for hours, and in some cases days after the fact. And even though stone doesn't burn, all the wood and clothing and food and straw and people within Harrenhal, well, they all died. And obviously, here we are many, many years later. Harrenhal is still a ruin, as we see when Daemon arrives and basically takes it with a couple people who are just enjoying dinner and having a bowl of peas. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's slow down and go back a bit, because initially we also see the dysfunctionality of Aegon's small council. And when you think back to what it was like when Otto Hightower was the Hand and Viserys was the king, it seemed orderly and it seemed mature and it seemed adult. And now it's just a lot of people screaming and bickering. And obviously Aegon is not helping matters at all. But basically anytime someone says, I want to go burn this city or I want to march on this town or whatever, he's like yes to all of it. And while Criston Cole might be struggling to fill the shoes of Otto Hightower as the Hand of the King, in his own way, he also recognizes the strategic value of Harrenhal, and he decides he's going to march on Harrenhal as well. He wants to march in secret. Of course, Aegon's like, no, I want to fly on Sunfire. I want to help out. Or send his brother Aemond on Vhagar, the biggest goddamn dragon of them all. He just wants, full-blown aggression, so on and so forth. But slowly but surely, Aegon is convinced to stay behind. And there's a really interesting scene where Clubfoot sees Aegon basically being fitted with Aegon the Conqueror's Valyrian suit of armor. Basically, that entire suit of armor is worth like a castle unto itself. But Larys kind of starts whispering in his ear about how, well, if you leave and support Criston Cole in the field, people are whispering that Alicent and Aemond will kind of rule in your absence, which is just enough to kind of plant the seeds of doubt in Aegon and make him stay home, whereupon he promotes Larys to become his new Master of Whisperers. And while his predecessor didn't see the need for or the value in a Master of Whisperers, obviously Clubfoot, he's a schemer, he's a mover and shaker, and he is moving up in the world. Also, quick side note about Criston Cole. I saw last week that some people had been abusing the actor who plays him, Fabian Frankel, online for the kind of more villainous twists or turns of his character this season. And they were basically just eating him a new asshole, basically saying how dare you, start behaving this way, somehow confusing the character of Criston Cole with the actor who plays him. And I want to say, first and foremost, separate reality from fiction. Fabian Frankel's an actor, Criston Cole's the character, but Fabian Frankel neither writes the books, nor does he write the show. He just is there to read his lines. If you have an issue with the new direction for the character of Criston Cole, take it up with George R. R. Martin, because Criston Cole is being written in an incredibly faithful fashion to the book Fire and Blood. And obviously, people have to remember that in season 1, he got his heart broken by Rhaenyra when he asked her to run away with him. She shot him down. So Criston Cole is still tending to a broken heart. But for all the kind of bottom feeders out there who confuse actors with the characters that they play, they all just need to, get a grip. But some other interesting details. Rhaenyra notices that her dragons are starting to get restless, especially the ones without a rider like Seasmoke. She finally decides that she needs to send all of her more vulnerable children and relatives off to the Vale to serve as wards where they can be protected, because obviously up in the Vale, once you're up in that castle, it's very hard to get to. And so she decides to send her son Joffrey, the youngest son that she had with Breakbones, to the Vale. And Rhaena is being sent along because Rhaena is not yet a dragon rider, but Baela will be staying behind on Dragonstone with her dragon just to do a little reconnaissance, as we see later on in the episode when she nearly burns Criston Cole to death. But the scene that I was looking forward to most this episode, when Daemon takes Harrenhal, I would say it was pretty cool, but I was a little disappointed because when Daemon takes that castle in the book, the word of it spreads like a brush fire, and Aegon back in King's Landing, like, can't believe that like this important castle has been taken, a castle that's so close to King's Landing, and it makes him even like more irrational, more bloodthirsty, more prone to like fly into outbursts and that sort of thing. And like right now, at least, like no one seems to know that Daemon's even pulled it off. But I thought it was cool when he's like sneaking through the castle and wielding Dark Sister, and he bumps into Simon Strong, who very eagerly bends the knee. Simon Strong is the great uncle to Clubfoot, and he assumes, rightfully so, that Clubfoot is a kinslayer who murdered his own brother and father, and so he's more than happy to throw his hat in with Daemon. But what I disliked about how they handled the taking of the castle by Daemon, they kept it such a secret, whereas in the book, it's considered like a masterstroke on the part of the Blacks. Like, oh my God, like the Blacks are winning the war. They've already taken Harrenhal. They're gathering forces there. Like, oh shit, King's Landing is next. And I just feel like, for whatever reason, this season so far has been very reluctant to allow Daemon to be portrayed in kind of like a badass fashion. Like, he doesn't have to be a hero, because we all know he's not a hero. He's power mad with ambition and that sort of thing. But at least like show him being a true Targaryen. He's got the blood of the dragon, and taking Harrenhal is a big deal, even if there was no one there really to stop him. But an additional wrinkle that is added to this episode is the arrival of Sir Gawain Hightower, the brother of Alicent, who's a little annoyed by the fact that his father's been recently kind of demoted as Hand of the King. And Gawain, you can tell, he likes his inns, and he likes his wine, and he likes his women. He's kind of a spoiled brat in a lot of ways, so he's not going to necessarily be that useful to Criston Cole, as we see when their army's out in the field, and he's like, well, I'm going to go to this inn, and maybe I'll see you at dawn, or maybe I'll see you a little later. But Criston Cole, who's actually keeping an eye on the sky, does notice that there is a small but dangerous dragon. Like, Moondancer's not that big yet, but Moondancer is big enough. You don't have to be that big of a dragon to kill people. I mean, we can all remember the early seasons of Game of Thrones, when Daenerys' three dragons, when they're just babies, they're still more than capable of burning people alive. But at least that scene gave us a little bit of danger, a little bit of action, and Cole now knows that his forces need to move at night and also through forests to avoid being taken by dragons. So it's not necessarily a full-blown battle yet, but at least it's teasing that those battles are coming. But getting back to the events in King's Landing, I did think it was interesting. There was one great character beat for Aegon when he's listening to the gossip of some of his new members of the Kingsguard, and he hears them kind of jokingly referring to their vows of chastity. And even from Aegon's point of view, I mean, Aegon's a drunk, and he's a womanizer, and a bit of a fool, and a bit of a child, but you could tell he kind of for a second realizes, oh shit, like, my reign has been pretty lackluster so far. I've got an untested, inexperienced hand. I've got these new Kingsguard guys who aren't necessarily as pure and noble as some of their predecessors. And he just seemed to kind of frowned himself, like, yeah, like things aren't off to as strong a beginning as he would like. But that doesn't stop him from having a wild evening on the town. He stops by a tavern where someone who's claiming to be a bastard Targaryen is boasting and bragging about being the half-brother to Viserys and to Daemon, but he shuts up pretty goddamn quickly when Aegon walks in. And then Aegon ends up going to a house of ill repute where he bumps into his brother Aemond, who is a little preoccupied with the girl who took his V card. He only likes having sex with his first. But we did get to see his Johnson. So for anybody who's been fantasizing about seeing Aemond in the nude, this was the episode. And, it doesn't bother me one way or another how many dicks this show chooses to reveal. However, we can all remember the early seasons of Game of Thrones when actresses like Emilia Clarke or Natalie Dormer or Carice Van Houten or Esme Bianco were, showing their lovely bodies left and right. And I feel like if you're going to show us a bunch of dingalings, well, then I want to see some tatas as well. And if that sounds crude and coarse and vulgar, like, just all I'm asking for is parody and balance and some consideration for people who don't fantasize about having sex with Aemond. Some of us want to have sex with some of the other characters. And if this show were to throw us a bone on that front, who knows? It might even solve some of the ratings issues that HBO's been experiencing with this show. Because, huge surprise, guys like to see naked women. Like, I don't know why I have to explain this to people, especially to a network or a cable channel like HBO, where with shows like The Sopranos or Deadwood or Rome or Game of Thrones gave us just a cornucopia of nudity. They know it helps drive the popularity of a show. Like, look at season 1 of Westworld versus the subsequent seasons. Season 1 of Westworld had the most nudity, and that was the most popular season. I'm not saying that's the primary reason, but it was definitely, it's just part of the overall package, like what's being offered to the audience. But there was another interesting scene with Daemon back at Harrenhal where he has a dream that somebody's trying to get into his chambers. He walks out and he sees the young version of Rhaenyra sewing on the head of baby Jaehaerys, and she tells Daemon that she's always cleaning up after him. And then he sees this dark-haired girl who will be, I can't remember her name. She's a big character, not a big character from the book, but an important character from the book. But she makes this prediction that Daemon will die in Harrenhal. And I will neither confirm nor deny her prediction. If you want to look up the final fate of Daemon, just read Fire and Blood or look up the wiki or whatever the case might be. But I did think it was interesting that they would provide that foreshadowing this early on in season 2. And then the episode should have ended with soldiers arriving at Harrenhal and bending the knee and swearing loyalty to Daemon and to Rhaenyra and marching off to war to kill Rhaenyra's enemies in the Riverlands. But instead, we got that ridiculous scene where Rhaenyra traveled to King's Landing, making one last gesture or stab at trying to be the great conciliator like her grandfather Jaehaerys. And while I'm fascinated with any and all references to King Jaehaerys, he was the greatest of all the Targaryen kings. It just, like I said before, felt like complete and total TV filler. Instead of getting to the good stuff that everybody wants to see, they're trying way too hard to show the kind of like the wise and gentle side of Rhaenyra and Alicent. And if people read the books, Rhaenyra is not that nice a person. Like, they make her much kinder in the show. I think they recognize the show or the story is so filled with all these kind of bloodthirsty bastards. Some people have to show some restraint. But Rhaenyra, she's pretty diabolical in the book as well. And I just felt like it was if you want to show her being kind and gentle and wise, let her do things that are wise as opposed to things that are reckless and stupid and self-destructive. And then I guess the only interesting part of the scene is when Alicent makes a reference to the prince that was promised, and Rhaenyra basically realizes that her father, as he was dying, was talking about Aegon the Conqueror and visions and that sort of thing, and how Alicent might have misinterpreted what he said, but Alicent at this point, she refuses to believe that she misinterpreted her dead husband's words. And basically, it's like, even if she would like to have peace, she recognizes things are too far gone at this point. But for a series that's famous for ending on scenes of like thunderous importance or, shock and horror, like basically this is the definition of a water cooler show where people watch it on Sunday night. They go to work the next day, and before they do anything, they go to the water cooler, pour a little drink in one of those little conical paper cups and say, oh my God, did you see this fucking show last night? It was fucking incredible. It needs to give you something to talk about. And I'm sorry, a teaser for next week's episode, as badass as it looked, the teaser for episode 4 looks fucking incredible. That's not enough. We needed to have something happen. And if you read Fire and Blood, it is full of all sorts of horror and murder and mayhem and bloodshed, all of which could be used to basically provide cool cliffhangers or dramatic finishes to each and every single episode all season long. So I think overall, this was the weakest of the 3 episodes of season 2. I still love the show dearly. I want the show to succeed. I want the show to do well. I want the adaptation of The Night of the Seven Kingdoms to do well. I want anything and everything related to George R. R. Martin's books to do well and be the best version of itself that it can possibly be. But even if I'm obsessed with these books, and I'm currently listening to the audiobook of Night of the Seven Kingdoms just because it's that goddamn good, but we can't take leave of our senses and refuse to criticize the show. Even if we're rooting for it, you still have to be honest about when the show stumbles, and especially when writers and directors who are not George R. R. Martin introduce things to the show that are just fucking weak, that are kind of, subpar. And when there's so much good material to be adapted, subpar just doesn't cut it. In any case, that's all I have to say this week. Looking forward to reviewing Maxine, which I'm seeing tomorrow night. I'm looking forward to reviewing Kill, which I'm seeing on Tuesday. Some very cool flicks on the horizon, so definitely come back to the channel over the next day or two for more content. But if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell. I would greatly appreciate it, but I hope everybody has an amazing week. I look forward to hearing everybody's thoughts, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.